So welcome back to the 1760 sessions where we talk to founders building businesses with purpose and intention. I'm Harry, co-founder of 1760, and today I'm joined by the fantastic Kate Cockrill and Corinne Ferris, the co-founders of SkillCharter, a leadership and team development consultancy helping growing organizations in the Pacific Northwest build the kind of leaders their teams actually deserve. Kate is based in Portland, Corinne in Seattle, and together they bring something rare, two completely different professional journeys that somehow add up to one very sharp practice. Kate and Corinne, great to have you both here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Did I get the locations right?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
So to kick off with, Kate, you founded an organization back in 2013 with no leadership background and had to figure it out in real time. How did that experience shape the way you now teach leadership to others?
That's a great question. So where I was in 2013 is I worked as a researcher. I was running research studies at the University of California, San Francisco in social sciences. And the programming I was working on really fit better in a nonprofit model. So we took the programming outside of the university and I founded a nonprofit. And I described the experience as moving from being a person at the team meeting with my hand raised and enthusiastic with ideas to almost feeling like I was the target of questions, difficulties, challenges. It was almost like everything that related to the organization was now aimed at me because I was holding the senior role in this particular organization. And that transition was maybe shouldn't have been unexpected. But as I've talked to many other leaders, it's this feeling, it's that what got you here won't get you there kind of thing, right? All of a sudden, I'm leading people, not just leading my own contribution. And I had to look into that. And so how it kind of leads to what we do now is that I ended up having to reach out for a ton of support from people around me to guide me through that process. And I reached out to other leaders. And one person who I particularly trusted told me that one of the biggest or well-kept secrets of leadership is that most leaders have had a coach. Most leaders have worked with someone to help them develop their own skills because leadership skills are not often taught to leaders. That they come up through a subject matter expertise often or through business expertise, and then they're kind of plopped in this position, or they earn the position of being in charge of groups. So this is how a lot of people build their skills, is through coaching.
So at that point, did you go and reach out to a coach yourself, or
I did.
Okay.
Immediately, maybe like 30 minutes after the first phone call. I think if you're a leader, you know when you're out on thin ice and you need to grab those resources right away. So I had taken a course similar to what the kinds of courses that Corinne and I teach, and I'd really, really liked the instructor. I had a really positive experience of him. He seemed really wise. I liked his delivery method, and I love frameworks. Like, I need something I can hang on to. So this guy was had a lot of capability around frameworks. So I reached right out and we started coaching the next week.
And do you still to this day use any of the frameworks that he potentially taught you?
Oh, so many. So many of them. Absolutely. Yeah. I never throw anything away.
Okay,
That's
good.
been useful.
He was clearly worth his salt then. That's awesome. So Corinne, yours starts even earlier. You were 21, coaching a high school dance team, having not the greatest first season, I recall you saying. An athletic director hands you a book and something then clicked for you. What was in that book that you think changed everything?
Yeah. So I was young and thought, how hard could it be? And similar to Kate, just had that experience of it's really hard and the heat is always on you. And what I realized is it's not what you do, but how you do it. It's not, you see this in athletics all the time. And I think the same goes for leadership. You can have the smartest or best people on your team, but if you're not functioning as a team, it's going to be really hard to be successful in the long term. And so in my program, we didn't always get those kids that were studio dancers since they were 3 years old and We're still at the studio for 5 or 6 nights a week and then also doing dance team. So what I had to figure out was how can we be successful with the kids who have a ton of heart and want to work really hard? How can we be successful? And so I looked at building a leadership program and not just building dancers. And that book really explained like what are the skills and strategies that leaders need in order to build that team. The other thing was my athletic director. I said to him, I don't really care if they like me. I just need them to respect me. And he said, good luck. I was like young. I'm like, yeah, they just need to respect me. And he's like, you can't have both of those things. And so that's why I really enjoy coaching because coaching helps you realize that um, how you can build those relationships with people so that they want to work with you, that they want to come to you with big problems and small problems, that they want to work for you and show that they can succeed under your leadership. And you do that by building those relationships. And because of what Kate and I have experienced, which is that immense feeling of overwhelm, having someone to walk alongside you through that process can really open those doors earlier.
And look, I think that's huge. You want to be able to someone to go to battle with you, so to speak. And having my background being sales, I've worked with some sales leaders who will throw you under a bus when the numbers are down, and some of them will get in the trenches with you and own your number with you. So I think that book must have been a very, very good read. Did you see potential team members come out as potential leaders that you didn't even realize they had that in them?
Honestly, that's those are the folks that I like to seek out,
Yeah, yeah,
uh, because they there's a lot of conversation right now happening around like introverted leaders versus extroverted leaders.
yeah.
And extroverted leaders are obviously because they're more outspoken, they're often more widely accepted in our working culture. But finding those people who can lead um, by just being who they are. And I had one leader who on paper maybe wouldn't seem like a team captain, but, her ability to not say anything, but get the rest of the team to follow her was really impressive, and it was because of not the big, like, rah-rah conversations that she had with the team, but it was because she built individual relationships with kids and in small groups so that they respected her, in a totally different way, and she
Yeah.
didn't need to have those rah-rah conversations. There was other kids that could do that, or I would do that, right? But but I think that everybody has leadership in them. It's about harnessing what works within their own style or personality.
I take it within the skill charter frameworks, you uncover who's potentially the introverted leader and who's potentially the extroverted leader. And you probably have to sit back and listen to understand what they're saying to put them onto the right frameworks and take them down the right path. Is that right?
A little bit. So we use a couple different types of assessments to understand people's different work styles. And I don't think any of them particularly look or explicitly look at introversion and extroversion, but I can give you a different example of something that might be measured using the assessments we use. One is just how active people are or tend to be in a conversation, right?
Yeah.
So you meet people, and this I think you can see this really play out in the context of an online meeting. If you are meeting together in Zoom across a lot of different geographies, you might notice that there are people who are more inclined to keep their cameras off, write things down, think of things later. And there are people who want to, have cameras on, be active in the conversation. If you add in then the layer of power, right? Who is running the meeting? Who's presenting at the meeting? Then sometimes what can happen is you can really disengage groups of people by not giving attention to that kind of a factor. So when we work with groups, we use one particular system assessment called the DISC assessment that helps groups just see where do we all sit with regard to
Yeah.
our engagement in a group setting, and how can we make this an environment that actually um, creates a sense of inclusion of thoughts and ideas from everyone in the room. And then, as Corinne's talking about, that means that anyone can be a leader. because leadership is about aligning people toward a common goal. That's sort of the general definition of leadership. So a quiet person can have those ideas, who's thoughtful and has thought about it and written down some suggestions. A person who's, blasting off with tons of ideas could do that too. But we want to give lots of people opportunities to play in that space of leadership.
And one thing you touched on there is something I've thought about previously is the fact that we're all online now. Well, a lot of our conversations are online. People do have the opportunity to turn off their cameras and disengage a little bit. Is there a way you go about potentially trying to draw those characters out? Or do you draw those characters out maybe through one-to-one times and one-to-one speaking?
I think that this is the facilitator hat, right? So we wear a lot of different
Yeah.
hats in our business, right? When you're thinking about how do I create a situation in which a group can participate equally. Um, so I would say the way that I do it as a facilitator and the way that I would train leaders to do it is to think of your group as essentially like this is a group of people with great ideas. This is a group of people that I want and desire to be engaged and motivated. And people need to weigh in to buy into. So if I want their
Yeah.
commitment to ideas later on down the line, I need to hear what they have to say. So it's in my best interest to create the context in which people can speak up. So I might look at something like cameras off, not participating as an indicator that we haven't met those criteria yet. Right. So one simple way to do it is to indicate that there are times where cameras are on or off. Another way would be to give people writing time. Another is to have everyone turn their cameras off. You could use turn taking. You can have an agenda that assigns people facilitation. You can move around who's going to be the facilitator.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're trying to is one size does not fit all because
Yeah.
groups have very different collections of individuals in them. But what we want to do is not give up. We want to experiment with how can we leverage the intelligence of the group.
Yeah, and that's probably the most positive way to do it because it's a completely different world we're living in compared to, anything from a corporate workshop. You used to be able to take the whole day off of work. Well, take the whole day off. You'd be involved in this workshop all day. You can really get to know people. Whereas now, anything corporate workshop wise tends to be an hour out of your day. So we're living in a different world. So you guys met through your coaching program, not through the industry. Here's a question for both of you. What did you each see in each other that made you think, this is someone I want to build something with?
I'll go first. First of all, Kate's background is really impressive, and just her ability to build a business was something where I felt like in my business I was succeeding, but I was becoming a little more stagnant, and so I wanted to partner with somebody like Kate. Um, the second thing was drive. That she had a real interest in wanting to build something, which was also something that many years ago I had kind of, I don't want to use the word manifest, but manifested this idea that I was going to build something special. And so finding that partnership was kind of that next step. And then the third thing was that we'd had a similar problem statement that we were trying to solve for, which was that we were going into organizations and kind of taking on like a fractional role. So taking on a fractional role where we were identifying strategies that would build leadership within an organization who either didn't have anything prior to, or they were missing pieces of it. And we're coming in and doing things like coaching and workshops and alignment with executive teams and while that's great for one person, you can do even more when you have a partnership and when you can build a team. And so that to me was hearing Kate and I kept in contact after our coaching program and always talked
Yeah.
about business, but seeing that we were both like, how can we support organizations as a team of one, or should we do it in a partnership was really what I think drove that
Amazing.
conversation for the two of us. And Kate was the one that drove it because she is a driver.
That's amazing. So both aligned around the same mission statement. That's awesome. What
Yeah,
about you,
absolutely.
Kate?
Well, for me, I admire Corinne's ability to think big. Like I think that there's a degree to which I don't know, I wouldn't call this imposter syndrome, but my parents are, a teacher and a pastor. I didn't come from like a corporate background. I wasn't raised like in this field. And so some of it still, even though I'm in my mid 40s, feels, like a little bit new to me. And Corinne is fearless about talking to people, meeting people. She gets big projects. So from a business development perspective, I knew she would really raise my game and encourage me to do things that I think, I wouldn't have originally thought of. Um, and she's also constantly thinking about ways that we can move the business into something that we can really deeply share with other people and that they will easily understand. I think that I have a tendency toward complexity and specificity. And so Corinne is really good at helping me think of, what can we offer to people that's easily understandable, simple, has a process
Yeah,
behind it
yeah.
that people can recognize.
So you like to get into the weeds, Kate, whereas then Corinne simplifies it, is what I'm hearing.
Hmm.
But very similar to my working relationship with my co-founder. But that's awesome. It sounds like you guys are the perfect balance, and you balance each other out. So SkillCharter has only been live since August, so relatively new, and you're both very experienced individually. But this partnership is still essentially new. What has being a co-founder taught you that 5 years of solo practice potentially couldn't?
I would say, looking at what we had both built and bringing it together, you realize like where there were holes in both businesses, and then also looking at how things overlap, and then making decisions on which direction do we go. Um, the other thing that we keep saying is our commitment to our relationship to each other is going to make us really strong with leaders and founders in other organizations, because we will have like boots on the ground experienced it. And so it's gonna be really advantageous for us to have built this relationship over the course of the last couple of months and years to come.
It's
Yeah,
very
and it's
awesome.
interesting, I think, being in a partnership with somebody who you've watched be successful individually, because the at least my tendency in some situations is to kind of trust my own way, right? It like you've done this for a reason and you're doing it for a reason, but then you see somebody be successful using a completely separate set of assumptions, like different practices, and so you become less, I think that's where compromise can come from. It's that we have deep trust that the other person has found a way to be successful, even if we don't use the same systems and strategies. So I think I think we're very lucky to have been able to kind of have that experience of being in a coaching program. We both know we're good coaches. We've coached each other many, many times. And then we actually took some time apart to kind of think about, building our own businesses, doing it our own way. And now we're kind of in this third act where we're working together and we're bringing all of those pieces together. So I think we're very lucky in that way.
Yeah, I bet. So I take it you probably got all your frameworks, your best practices at the very start of your relationship, laid them all out on the table and said, right, let's make these work together, or work out what works for one client and what doesn't work for another.
Well,
So
that sounds very organized. We did not do that. I'm like
I was just
regularly
gonna
learning. That sounds so organized. No, the other day Corinne gave this presentation. We do webinars to kind of, and this is
yeah,
something that people can kind of jump in on monthly basis. We do a webinar to kind of help managers and leaders think through a problem. And last month, Corinne gave one on change. Now I have my change presentation. Hers looks nothing like mine. I learned so much value. I'm thinking about doing mine differently. So I think we're still in the process of learning, but that has been part of I think the fun here is getting to watch. For me, getting to watch you Corinne do something so awesome and be like, oh, there's a completely new way that I could do this. Is very exciting.
I love to hear it. It's like you complement each other perfectly. So leaning into what SkillCharter actually does now, and look, we've spoken about it quite high level. Corinne, you mentioned, you used the phrase fractional leadership development before. And for founders and business owners listening who've never had a formal L&D program, what does that actually mean in practice?
So the first thing that I hope I'm answering this question right. The first thing that we do when we engage with a new organization is find out, what they have and then what they think they need, like what are the problems that they're trying to solve for. And then the next that we need to look at is capacity. And by capacity, I mean financial capacity, but then also time capacity. And once we know that greater picture, because we aren't living in those organizations, but once we have that information, then we can build programming out. Um, and if for a founder who is maybe unsure that it will work, or, they feel a little shy about it, sometimes we'll start with just an initial engagement.
Okay.
So, for instance, I was working with 3 owners on a project, and they had no leadership development. They're growing fast. They're like, what do we do? So I put together this whole plan. I said, in a year, we're going to kick off with this in-person workshop with your leaders. And then we're going to do this ongoing training with them. And then we're going to do coaching here. And, so I laid out this whole thing. And they said, can we just start with the workshop? We want to see how people are going to react to it. So we did that. So we did in-person 2 half days, a little bit more than a half day each, and gave the leaders a taste of what leadership development looks like, because this organization had never seen it. And some of these leaders had been in the business for 15 plus years and had never received an ounce of leadership development training. And so they were hungry after that. And so I could then first of all, now I knew more about the organization, but second, they saw the ROI on having this training. And so then we built out the next year of leadership development for this organization. So yeah, it's really about knowing and then from there, knowing what their capacity is, obviously, because some leaders are so busy that telling them that they have to meet for 3 hours every month, right? Like that's not possible. So meeting them where they're at and making sure that they get something that is long lasting, similar to Kate's first coach, like really teaching her stuff that she could
Yeah.
use for a long time.
And do you ever get any pushback? Because you said it there, it's someone that's been a leader for 15 years. They've never had any, or been on an L&D program, for example. Do some leaders stuck in their own way and potentially push back against your coaching methods, or they're stuck in their own ways, so to speak?
Yeah, I feel like, especially in workshops, we can get that. But for maybe every 1 or 2, you get 8 or 9 who are
Yeah.
really motivated to learn and grow. I think that there is this post-COVID world has created a little bit of like a crisis for leaders in trying to do everything for their teams. And so this type of training and development for them is crucial. And I think because we do a combination of like the emotional intelligence behind it, as well as like true strategies for developing as a leader, I think that it helps leaders break down what it is that they're trying to do and figure out what is actually capable for them.
Okay. And I think it's so important in today's world because it's changing so quickly. You need to adapt. And I think as a leader specifically, you need to move with the times because otherwise you will get left behind and your methods won't be valid anymore, so to speak. Kate, you said before that the service is bespoke for you coaching based on our training. How does an engagement typically start? What's the first thing you do with a new organization?
I think, like Corinne said, a lot of times people are most comfortable starting with a retreat or a workshop. And to your point, we love doing that in person if we can, because that's what really gives people the opportunity, not just to get to know us, but to get to know how they feel with us around, right? There's this experience. A leader, for example, is a great, they have an outsized impact on the group. And so we might have a leader who's nervous about
Yeah.
what might be surfaced in a conversation with the group, but then they see it go well, and that transitions their whole experience. All of a sudden, they're not feeling so targeted or on the hook. They're feeling, oh, okay, there's actually a lot of goodwill in this group now for me to work with here. And once that happens, once that kind of stretch is available and people have more goodwill to one another, we use a lot of tools and tricks to get to that point. Then that's when that's when we can really start to get down to it, right? If people are open and they believe that increasing their skills, increasing communication, trying new things is valuable, then we can kind of add in programming that really makes sense for them in that
Yeah.
moment, whether that's leadership development or management training or team coaching.
It's almost like taking a look under the hood and seeing, right, what's not working, and then we can apply the right methodologies and frameworks. And you said before you work with companies, 50 to around 500 person range, I think, um, that don't potentially have sophisticated internal systems. What's the exact sweet spot? What goes wrong at those companies that wouldn't go wrong somewhere maybe bigger?
Well, I think in the startup world, for example, you might have a company that started with a founder and a few software developers that the founder knows, right? And then it expands and they bring on someone for some kind of administrative role. And then as the company continues to grow and maybe they're bringing in revenue, that person who started out in an administrative role is moved into an operational role and then they're handling HR, right? And so
Yeah.
this is similar to actually Corinne and my experience where we've kind of had to do a lot of different roles within the companies that we've served in. And so when you have that, you have people who are really, really smart. They're very driven toward improvement and finding things to make more efficient. And yet they have not gone through leadership training. They've never
Yeah.
gotten coaching maybe before. And so there's a combination of like a hunger for the kind of services that we provide and the fact that they don't want to pay a full-time person to do this. And even if they did, they might not be able to get someone with the level of experience that Corinne and I have for what they
Yeah.
can pay. So it's a real value add for them to bring in this external functionality temporarily to kind of shape what they want to do, and then think about over time how they're going to staff that. So they get the value before they have to staff up the position, I think is the short answer.
Okay. Amazing. So you both to this framework, these methodologies, you both bring different things. Okay. So Kate, your background, coaching, consulting, public health. Corinne, yours is school counseling, HR operations, even athletic coaching, as we discussed earlier. How did the two lenses actually combine in a client engagement?
Hmm. It's a good question. I mean, I think for starters, the fact that our origin stories are so similar in that we know what it's like to feel completely lost in what you're doing has really been a benefit to a lot of these teams or organizations who have no idea where to start when it comes to leadership development. And we're able to say, totally hear you. We've been there and we're here to help you through that. I think Kate's background in public health and my background in school counseling means that because of the nature of both of those businesses, I think we converge on this, again, that emotional intelligence side to the work that we're going to be doing within these organizations. Kate, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I mean, I think we both in some cases an outsider status is sort of it's a way of having a little bit of a I'm trying to think of like the outsider status can be valuable to people. If we
Yeah.
came in with a really strong kind of McKinsey approach, which was, very familiar to corporate, I think sometimes it doesn't match a startup environment or a small business environment because they're not at that level of sophistication. They're not thinking with those kinds of frameworks. They're really in the marketplace trying to get their work done and trying to serve their customers and so I think there's sometimes a mismatch where the level of leadership development that's brought in is a misfit for the organization. I think that we're a little bit we're willing to roll up our sleeves and be a little bit thoughtful and certainly attend to someone's budget and how can they get really, really great services that actually match their team's needs in
Yeah.
not a one size fits all way. Um, without having to, work with a huge company that's going to charge them, 10 times what we charge. I think that we offer as much value, but it's just we kind of get what it's like to be a little guy and
Nice.
scrapping your way through and figuring out what's best. And we can bring some of that sophistication to smaller players, I think.
Amazing. And help those smaller players get to bigger places,
Hmm.
essentially. So look, I want to try something a bit different here. We're going to dive into like a use case potentially. So I spent 10 years in SaaS sales and I've had some extraordinary managers and I've had some generally not so great ones. And the awful ones, they weren't bad people. They were just great salespeople who got promoted without ever being taught how to lead. Kate, when I described that to you before the show on our pre-call, you said you maybe wanted to dig into it a little bit. So this is what I'd like to do. Um, so you said the skills that make someone a brilliant individual contributor can actually get in the way when they become a leader. Can you explain that for me?
Sure. Um, and this is really, really well described in a book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And so that's a pretty well-known phenomenon in the journey from individual contributor to leader. But I think the primary difference is that you're trying to prove yourself as an
Yeah.
individual contributor. And as a leader, this completely goes back to Corinne's story as like a dance team leader, is you're really there for the team. You're helping the team leverage their strengths. And so there's a lot of getting out of the way that you have to do. And there's also a lot of, you have to think about how to be honest with people about what you're seeing and observing that may be coachable or maybe something that they need to grow without demotivating them. So, if you are the way we coach ourselves in our minds, is often quite harsh. Like your inner coach is often going to be like, analyzing things a certain way. It's not a strength based way necessarily. It's probably seeing a lot of deficit. And if you go to a person and you offer them just their deficits, it's a really demotivating experience.
Yeah.
So there's actually a practice that people learn, which is how to coach someone, how to draw out their own intelligence to help them be successful so that they no longer need you, which also helps the manager and the leader feel less stressed because they're not responsible for your success. So there's kind of this kind of major switch in mentality that you have to make for, I'm here for their success and they're responsible for their success, not me. And once you know that, now what tools do I use?
Okay. And it definitely leans back to Corinne's team playing story and getting the best out of people. So, what's the thing that nobody tells you when you get promoted? What's the conversation that should happen on day one of management role that almost never does?
I want to answer that. I think you get Kate mentioned when she started working at the nonprofit that she started, and she felt like there was a target on your back. And I
Yeah.
think the difficulty of hearing the negative more than the positive is often the thing that they don't talk about in leadership, right? You want to think, "Oh, I'm going to become a leader and I'm going to inspire people and I really want down the road for someone to say, "Wow, Corinne changed the trajectory of my career because of her mentorship."
Yeah.
But the truth is that you're going to hear a lot of, needing to help with personnel things that you are trying to navigate. And you're trying to figure out, is someone taking on too much workload or not enough? And are we meeting the goals of the organization? And no, you're hearing that from the top that you're not meeting those goals. And so you hear more negative than positive. And that is where that leadership armor can really come into play, and understanding the positive is there and here's how you can continue to focus on that while also becoming savvy in how to solve these issues as
Yeah.
they arise.
And I think we mentioned this maybe last time. It's that also, one, you mentioned it there, you don't understand the admin that you potentially get burdened with, but it's also managing up as well as managing down. Um, and do you have frameworks that potentially help leaders with that? How do they help their leaders, or how do they manage upwards to their leaders?
I mean, one that I think is kind of obvious but underrated is just getting back to basics on delegation and gathering requirements, right? So delegation is, how do you successfully communicate something to someone else that you'd like them to do independently of you? And then the other one is gathering requirements. How do you successfully draw out from a leader what it is that they want you to do so that you can meet their expectations? And like cleaning up that space, making sure that you're doing that and giving a lot of
Yeah.
attention to those things can really, I think, go a long way so that you are aligned. I mean, alignment is a big piece of the teamwork across levels of power in an organization.
Yeah, of course. And my last question in this segment is, I mentioned it earlier in the podcast, had two VPs of sales at the same company. One threw the team under the bus. The other would get in the trenches with me. What's the underlying difference there? Is that coachable?
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times what happens with a leader who feels insecure, which is to say all leaders at some time in their life and sometime in their journey are going to feel insecure. And when you feel vulnerable yourself, other people's mistakes and errors are magnified because you need them to get it right 100% of the time in
Yeah.
order for you to, so I think what we would probably do is take a look at the situation from a little bit of a stood back perspective, and help with some self regulation around the anxiety that they're experiencing. And then once that's in place, then we can think logically and rationally and strategically about how to engage the team through, communication, training, coaching, what's needed here becomes more clear, and the request is less desperate or forceful, depending on the style of the leader.
The other thing that would maybe recommend if that's not working is something like a 360 review feedback,
Oh,
which we
yeah.
do, because then it's not us saying it, it's feedback that they're receiving from their teams. And the way that we get that feedback is not necessarily from a here's all the things you're doing wrong, but here are where your strengths lie, and here are the areas that you could really benefit from doing some work in. And then coaching them on like what is your focus and what are strategies for improving in these other areas, and then how do we play off of your strengths as they stand. And that to me is a really good way for folks to be able to provide feedback in a framework that is digestible for the leader, which I think is part of it too. Like when you get met with really negative feedback, like if someone were to come to you, Harry, and say, you are throwing everybody under the bus, right? Like your immediate response is going to be like, no, I'm
On
not,
on the
you know?
defensive. You're going to go
And
straight on the defensive. Yeah.
yeah, so this is a way to not like hold back on providing feedback, but providing productive feedback in a way where folks see where their strengths are and where we can start to strategize on improving some of their weaknesses.
Yeah, amazing. And I think the 360 feedbacks are so beneficial. I've learned in the past things that I didn't know that I was doing that potentially weren't aligned with someone else in the business, or things that I was doing really well that I didn't even know I was doing well. And I think it's really beneficial, even teams that you don't work with as closely, because it's just beneficial to hear from multiple voices in order to improve.
Well, and what we talked about earlier, Harry, is that when we are getting that feedback, it's often perception. There's misperception happening. And so, from your former leader who you felt like maybe was throwing everybody under the bus, that might have been because of the way that they communicated, the way that they led certain meetings. Like there's a lot of things that maybe that wasn't their intent, but that was the perception. And
Yeah.
so by having these 360 review feedbacks, often what I hear is, well, that's not what I mean. This is what I'm actually doing. And I'm like, well, they don't know that. So just tweaking certain behaviors, it's not changing who you are and being somebody different. It's just tweaking a few things and identifying ways to communicate better, which is a huge issue that we see in leadership is communication, effective communication. Getting some of those things just tweaked can remove some of that misinformation.
Okay. And like, look, I really want to reach out to this leader and secretly send him your details so we can go through this, if you don't mind.
Yes.
So look, I've got a couple of questions just to finish off on. Like, this has been awesome. You've been live for over 7 months now. What does SkillCharter look like in 3 years? Same two founders, sorry, same models, or something different? What's next on the horizon, really?
You want me to take that? I would, uh, we've been working on a bench of really strong trainers and coaches
Amazing.
to come in and do this work in partnership. And in 3 years, we would like to have a number of organizations under that fractional model where we can employ a team of individuals to fit the needs of that organization, so that we can really come in and work with many organizations, and that they don't have to necessarily just get Kate or Corinne as a coach or as a trainer, but they can have a variety of voices in the room. So I think in 3 years, and the other thing that we were just talking about this morning, but is really starting to identify like what are the biggest challenges in organizations when we're
Yeah.
working with these organizations, and how can we create some repeatable models for organizations. So, Kate mentioned like we do like to roll up our sleeves and do
Yeah.
something that fits the organization, but how can we create some specific skill charter frameworks that we can bring into those organizations?
And it's going to help you scale massively as you bring on more clients because it's going to be a blueprint that will probably have to be some form of edit depending on the company, but it's a blueprint that you can take in and reuse time and time again should it fit that organization. So that's awesome. And my
Yeah.
final question, um, both spent your careers helping people step up into leadership for the first time. If you could give one piece of advice to a leader who's struggling right now, not a framework, not a tool, just one thing, what would that be?
Um, my favorite piece of advice was given to me in my early days as a leader. I was walking the boards on the phone with somebody, telling them how bad my life is and how terrible my employees were and how nobody was listening to me and nothing was going right. And a coach said to me, "You may be right, and it may not matter." And that really refocused me on servant leadership, working for the team, trying to find the strategies that would create the context where we could really all thrive together. So, my favorite piece of advice is you may be right and it may not matter.
You may be right and it may not matter. I will take that away because I think that happens often in our business. Corinne, what about you?
Uh, Slow down to speed up.
Yeah.
That when you have when you're under new leadership, you wanna be able to do everything, and what you see is, like, often, like, a hoarding of responsibility because you wanna prove that you are a great leader, and the result is often that the rest of your team can't do on their own. And so being able to slow down and identify what do I need to teach and coach my people on so that they can really thrive. And instead, I can be more of that servant leader mentality and less of that um, fire putter outer.
Yeah.
Uh, the more successful that you'll be in the long run, identifying what are your strengths and then what are the strengths of your team, and not trying to be strong in everything, but instead allow your team to be strong in what they're good at.
And that's still there leading back into that first book that you read back in athletics, coaching the people to be better. But guys, this has been awesome. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your morning to join me. I will include a link at the bottom here to Skill Charter. And thank you very much for coming on.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.